everybody. Welcome to the Sally Allen podcast. I am so glad you're here. Thank you so much for tuning in. As you know, this podcast is a platform where people share their stories of resilience. And today I have this beautiful, wonderful guest. She's such a sweet person and such an amazing human being. And I'm so honored and blessed to have her on the podcast, Miss Eva Jenkins. Welcome.
Hi, Sally. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm so glad you're here. So Eva is a licensed and family therapist, and she is a licensed therapist for drug and alcohol. Did I say that right?
Yes.
I think I forgot a word. And she's also a rep for Mary Kay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if you want beauty stuff, you know where to find her. She's on social media. So Eva, when I saw your title, something occurred to me. Like, you are really into helping people, right? You're a therapist for family, drug, alcohol, and usually when people get into that field, sometimes there's something that's driving them.
Yes, I had a very big drive from a very early age.
Tell us about it.
Well, it all started back when I was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, being a little girl and noticing my own family and the destruction that I really realized that alcohol and drugs can do to a family. And so growing up, I had realized that I felt like no one really paid attention to me that much. And I was constantly searching for love. And I thought the family unit was actually supposed to give that to someone. And because I didn't necessarily feel it in the home, I started looking it for other areas of my life with my friends, boyfriends, and even substances. I fell into doing drugs myself in order to feel that sense of satisfaction, happiness, everything that the world offers you, and not really noticing that what I really needed was the love of a father.
Yeah. How young were you when you start noticing that? Like, for me, I was 6 years old when I noticed that I was alone and the dysfunction in my family. How young were you when you noticed that, oh my gosh, this is not normal?
Yeah, I was about 5 years old as well. I noticed that when I would tell my mother something, she would tell her dad. And so I never felt like a sense of privacy or secrecy. And I always felt like they were trying to make me look bad. And so I didn't really understand how the family was making people look bad or making them feel bad inside, where we're supposed to make each other love one another.
Yeah. Did you think that your mom's past had something to do with the way she was?
Absolutely. After growing up and being so young, you don't even recognize that. But until you get older, you really recognize that she was just doing what she knew best because she was yearning for a father's love as well. And that was her earthly father. Although what I was yearning for was a heavenly father's love.
Yeah. But at that young age, you just didn't realize that's what you were looking for. So, and there are so many stories of dysfunction of people looking for love in all the wrong places until they really understand what love is. Because so many times we just compare our earthly father love with our heavenly father love, and there's no comparison.
Yeah. Because you have nothing else to compare it to, because you don't necessarily see God. So you're thinking that all of your parents and those who are in your family should be representing who God is. And when they don't do that, you get confusion inside of yourself when you're so young.
Yeah, we're looking for them to be perfect, and there's no perfection here.
Yes. And you don't understand, like, how come they don't love you when you're just a child?
Yeah. So what happened? So you realize this, you got with your friends, and you're looking for love for all the wrong places. What happened?
Well, because I still had that people-pleasing mentality, I wanted my mother's approval. And so she told me that I always needed a job. So at 11 years old, I ended up getting my first job. I ended up working at Arby's at 14. When I was 18, I had 3 consecutive jobs for like 5 years. And so because I cared so much about my mom's approval, I ended up moving back home when I was about 22 years old. And at this point, I hadn't been home for several years because I was far into my addiction. And I had realized that we could not be in the same room with one another. And that just made me go even further into my addiction and really felt like I was just alone and wasn't able to really have that sense of belonging that I was yearning for.
Yeah, yeah. Did your mom recognize any of this, or did you try to tell her how you were feeling?
Do you know what? No. When you are constantly in that, you are like trying to defend yourself. You are on the fight
Flight.
mode,
Yeah.
right? So it's like you just want to run away. You don't know what to do. You feel like you have to protect yourself. And so I was just giving back what I felt like she was giving me and not knowing that I was actually causing the same destruction.
Yeah, yeah. So when did all this pivot and changed?
It wasn't until I was actually in an overdose stage. I was tripping on acid, and one day I could see my whole life before me. And my parents were looking at me and asking me, how could I have done this? And it was in that moment that I said, you guys did this to me. And God spoke to me and said, you're choosing this for yourself. And I told him, if he was to get me out of my high, then I will choose to live my life for him. And the next day, I woke up just fine. And my first initial thought was, crap, do I have to like keep this promise I just made to God? But literally, it was impression on my heart to go home. And I found a book that said, you can heal your life. And it was the first time I ever heard about positive affirmations. And I've never heard anyone saying that you are worthy of something or that you are deserving of anything. And so I said, God, if this is true, then I need to get out of my situation. And all of a sudden, I started seeing signs for Las Vegas. And so I said, if this is from you, then I won't get a flat tire there. And I ended up packing everything in my car along with my dog and just came out from Michigan to Las Vegas
Wow, by yourself.
by myself.
I want to go back to your story where you first met God when you were, as you said, tripping on acid. Like, was there a vision or a voice, or how did you get that declaration from
It
him?
was an impression in my heart. And it was like a voice. Sometimes in that moment, it was as though it was my own voice, but there's no way I would have said, you're making your own choices for yourself.
Yeah,
Because I
yeah.
had no idea. So I just knew it was God talking to me in that moment.
Oh, so you packed your bags, you drove to Vegas, then what?
And then I ended up finding a roommate, stayed with that person, and they introduced me to someone where I could get a job. And that person introduced me to Central Christian Church. And I did not want to go to church. I was raised Catholic. I said, no, I'm good on the whole God thing. I'm out here for God, but I'm not going to church. But one day my roommates ended up doing drugs in the living room, and I said, where won't the devil go? And so the only place I knew was Central Christian Church. So I ended up going there on a weekday morning, had no idea what I was looking for. And I went in the building, and on the building it said prayer. And so I said, oh, that's what I need. I need prayer. And so I went and got prayer, and then ever since then, I never looked back by not going to church.
Wow, so that day at Central Christian Church, your whole life changed.
Yeah.
And that's where you started. So what got you into, you know, the therapist, what made you, I know your whole story, but, what prompted you after that?
Well, I didn't want to be one of those Christians that didn't know anything. And so because I really didn't go to college, I was brought up in a college town, and I already knew that they were all about parties and everything. And I was like, oh, I can just do this in high school. I don't need to do this now. And so I said, I need to go to school to know who God is and build my own faith. And so I ended up going to Lincoln Christian University for my Christian ministry degree. And then after that, I continued my education as a marriage and family therapist. And I realized the importance of a family unit and how important it would have been growing up if I would have been brought up in a non-dysfunctional home and with parents who were still married, because they ended up getting divorced when I was 11.
Yeah. Wow, that's really powerful. Yeah. So how did you meet Trey?
Well, in 2013, I was praying for my spouse. And by this point in my life, I had always jumped from relationship to relationship. And this point, I'm saying, I do not want to be in a relationship. And then all of a sudden, I started wanting to date again. And my roommate at the time told me, you need to pray for a husband. I was like, no. But then I realized I really do need to start praying for a husband. And so I started praying, whether he was deaf, blind, or in a wheelchair, God, I know it's going to be your very best for me. And so I was getting ready to speak at my first conference called Limitless. And my roommate at the time asked me what the name of the conference should be. And I said, Limitless, because God kept telling me how limitless he is.
Yeah.
And so I knew something big was going to happen at this conference, but I thought someone was going to hear my testimony and I was going to mentor them. But never did I ever guess that I was going to meet my husband there.
Now, you've told me the story, but you have to tell it. It was so powerful how you guys met.
And so telling his little part in it as well, he started praying for his spouse in August of 2013. So just a few months before me. And he had asked God who his wife is by December 31st of that year, because he had listened to a sermon by Jesse Duplantis about praying bold prayers and saying, what do you want from God? And he's like, okay, God, I want to know who my wife is. And so December 30th, he had nothing in the works. Like, he wasn't going to talk to anyone. He was on his way back from Mississippi. And so he kind of has like a concession prayer. And he says, okay, God, maybe you just want me to focus on school and I'll just do that, and kind of just letting God off the hook. Uh-huh. And so 2 hours later, he ended up getting a message on Facebook, and someone had sent him a picture of me and said, hey, do you know this woman? She speaks at the homeless ministry. She does a lot of stuff with the homeless, and so I thought you might know her. And he goes, no, I don't know her, and that made him curious to look me up on Facebook. He sent me a friend request, and I looked on his friends list, and I realized we had no mutual friends whatsoever. So I was thinking, like, why would this person send me a friend request? I don't even see any familiarity.
Yeah.
You know, and so I saw that we ended up going to the same university. And so I go, oh, well, maybe he knows me from there somehow. So I go ahead and I added him. And then a couple of days later, I ended up posting about the Limitless conference. And then he messaged me about it and said, you know, I'm curious to know what this is. And I told him about it. He ended up coming back on Friday. Mm-hmm. And to the conference, he ended up going. And God highlighted him out to me. And so when God highlighted him out to me, I knew I needed to go and introduce myself to him. So when I did that, I spoke that night, and he told me what he got from it. And then that night he got into his car, and he said, as clear as day, God spoke to him and said, Eva's going to be your wife.
Oh my gosh, that's
and then
so
he
exciting.
Starts crying, and then God tells him again, Eva's going to be your wife. Uh-huh. And then he's like, okay, well then how's this going to happen?
Yeah.
And the next day he comes back, someone comes up to him and says, hey, do you know Eva? She's single. And then, you know, he's like, oh, okay, that's weird. Someone else comes up to him, hey, do you know Eva? She's single. And then by this time I'm like, hey, I'm not speaking tonight. I'll sit next to you. So we sit next to each other, say not one word to each other. And then that night he says, hey, if you have a minute, give me a call. And that conversation just kind of flowed that I invited him to close out the conference the next day with me. And then he invited me to lunch. And it was in that conversation that God was saying, this is your equally yoked partner.
To you?
To me.
This is what you heard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so I said, you know what? I've been praying for my husband since November, and I believe God is telling me that it's you. And he looks at me and tells me what God told him on Friday and said, well, since we're going to get married, we might as well get to know each other.
Oh my gosh, this is such a great story. And that all happened in a matter of a few days.
Yes, literally.
Literally. And then how long after did you get married?
So we had our big wedding in 8 months later. And so when God had told me who my husband was, growing up, my mother had always told me that if I ever married a black man, she would disown me. And so I had always dated white men. And so when God had revealed who my husband was, I said, okay, God, you're going to have to work in my mom's heart. And when I met him, I had given my mom a call. And I said, oh, I met someone, and, he ministers to the homeless like I do, and all these great things. And then my stepdad ended up giving me a call, and he's like, I feel this is so right in my spirit. And I was like, awesome. That's good, like a good word for my mother.
Yeah.
And so a couple months later, my husband's like, you need to post a picture of what I look like. And so I said, okay. So I ended up posting a picture. My mom calls me and she goes, is he black? And I said, well, before you say anything, you're only this way because of your dad, and God is going to hold you accountable to your words and your actions. And so she goes, well, God's going to have to work in my heart. And I go, yes, he will. And so by the time the wedding came, you could see no issues in her heart whatsoever. Completely restoration, joy. It was amazing.
That's so cool. So cool. So do you still, with your mom, do you still have that people-pleasing mentality towards her, or have you worked through that, and how have you worked through that?
When I moved out to Las Vegas, right away, God put up my heart to forgive her. And so I really worked through deliverance and really forgiveness for my mother. And I do not have that people pleasing because I know I can't change anyone, and that is God's business. And so I just do what he tells me to do now. And I'm like, okay, God, you're going to work it all out. And even now, I have seen God heal and restore my relationship with my mom through my marriage, because my husband would send her scriptures and she would start doing Bible studies off of my husband's scriptures that he would send. And so I've really seen a whole restoration even in our relationship.
That's so cool, so cool. So for people out there, sometimes, they say, well, we know we should get married and God's calling us to. Mm-hmm. But within a year or two, right, that first 5 years is so crucial in marriage.
It really is.
So within a year or two, there starts to be this disconnect. And then they wonder, well, we got all these signs in the beginning. Mm-hmm. What's happening now? Mm-hmm. Perhaps this wasn't the case. Well, how would you advise someone with that?
Even with our strong testimony on how God brought us together, the enemy will still tell us that we married the wrong person. And so no matter what story you do have, you have to know that God put you together, and what God put together, no man can separate. And so really believing and trusting that this is a God-ordained relationship. And so not listening to those lies that remind you of your past relationships, not listening to those lies that tell you that, oh, they don't love you or they don't care for you. And so we can always have the deception in our minds as to what it is that we choose to believe. But you have to know that they have their best intention for you. And so whatever needs to get worked out has to get worked out within us in order for the union of the marriage to be healthy.
Yeah. How did you and Trey work that out? I know you work individually throughout it, but what are some other things you do, some practical things you did to work through that?
We definitely went to therapy. The first year, we went to counseling. And what I had noticed was that I wanted inspiration of seeing other couples where I knew that they were healthy, and I wanted that example in my life. I wanted to get close to them. I wanted to know, what are you doing? And having that accountability.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because if you don't have that in your life and you have no role model of it, you just don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
I think that's what you guys are doing with other couples now, right? Is that part of your ministry?
Yes. Yeah, we really care about restoration and healing of marriages, and waiting on God's best for you too, for singles.
Yeah, so I'm thinking you are, a big proponent of counseling before marriage to know what you're getting into.
Absolutely. Yeah, working on communication, because that's where it stems, right? The communication issues will always stem from our beliefs. And so if we don't gain new knowledge of new beliefs that we want to start believing, you're going to keep doing those old patterns of behaviors.
Yeah, I love that. Say that again. Communication stems from our beliefs.
Yes.
Yeah. So whatever we've gone through in the past, that's how we're crafting our thinking and communication as we're talking to the other person.
Absolutely, because it's all subconscious. We're not consciously aware of what's happening right now.
Yeah, so we are just dragging the past with us, not realizing it. And through therapy and counseling, they can help us discover that and learn how to communicate effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. What are some other things that you did?
Making sure that we had fun, because marriage can be so serious, and especially getting out of the house. It's really important in order to have fun with each other outside of the house and with friendships.
Yeah, yeah, very good. So what are you and Trey up to these days?
Well, we just started our own church called Powerhouse Church. It just launched 9/11/22. And so we're super excited because that was God giving us the date for it in Easter of 2019. And so literally right before COVID, and now that it's launched, we're 6 months into it. And so just building a team and just fostering and caring for God's people.
So you guys got this vision and date in 2019.
Yes.
Wow. Did COVID had any effect on that? Because you're like, this is not going to happen, because I know you're saying we're going to do this, but look at what's going on in the world right now. It's going crazy. Did it have any effect on that for you guys? Like, did it shake your faith?
No, not at all, because God did not tell us when yet, or like how.
Right.
And so if he doesn't give us a date for it, why would we put anything into motion? But as soon as he ended up giving us the date, we told our pastor, who prayed for us, confirmed the call, and then everything just started aligning up. And he ended up getting us connected with Stadia, a church planting facility. And so now this is where we're at.
Wow. That's amazing. And I can see you guys have like this unshakable faith. Yeah.
Yeah, we can't do it without him.
Yeah. So you are out of the country recently. Tell us where you are.
Yes, I was in Israel for the first time. Oh my goodness.
How was that?
It was so beautiful, so amazing. And what was really a blessing was being able to get baptized in the Jordan where Jesus was.
Yes. Yes, I think that would be incredible. That would have been incredible. What was your highlight of that trip? Being a believer and where you came from and your faith is so strong, like what was your highlight?
Just being able to see the fields and noticing that one of the bus drivers ended up saying to us that a good shepherd knows where to find food. And so when you look out there, it's so open and you can see sheep being led by someone. And it's so amazing, because where would you find the food if it's so open and you don't really see any other animals out there? But a good shepherd knows where to lead its flock.
That's
I thought that was
powerful.
really powerful.
Yeah. So Ava, as a Christian woman, I know we go through trials even though our faith is strong, right? What is your biggest challenge and what do you still struggle with?
Because I had been brought up with my mother not wanting a daughter and telling me that she would not be close to me when I was younger, I always had this root of rejection from other women. And so that is part of why I ended up joining Mary Kay, is because it makes me face that fear every day of saying, I no longer want this part of my story of feeling like I'm being rejected by other women. And even if I am, to not take it personally and not allow it to become deeply rooted as it once was.
Yeah. How are you working through that? What tools are you using for someone listening? What tools are you using to help you? I know it's scriptures and stuff, but practically, how are you getting through that?
Yeah, facing the fear.
Facing the fear.
And my Mary Kay business helps me do that, because it's a woman's business.
Yeah.
So putting myself out there and putting myself into groups and connections and any place that I can where other women are.
Yeah. What's your biggest accomplishment?
Oh my goodness, surrendering my life to Jesus.
You'll probably go there, but I wasn't sure. Yeah.
I would not be where I'm at today without him.
Both you and me. Both you and me. So I get that and I understand that. So yeah. All right. So we're at 4:48. What takeaway do you have for our audience today?
Well, I know that everyone is looking for a sense of love and a sense of belonging. And you don't have to look any further than the love of our Father, who loves us with an immense love that is so deep and so wide that we cannot even comprehend or imagine. And so it's not to look for it in all of these outside things in the world has to offer us, but really seeking God with all of our strength, all of our hearts, and all of our minds.
Yeah. Eva, where can people find you? I know you're a therapist. How can they find you?
Well, right now I am practicing at Beyond Therapy at 215 in Cheyenne. And you can find me on Instagram at Mary Kay Las Vegas.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being so open and so vulnerable. I appreciate having you on the podcast. Any final words before we close out? What's your favorite scripture? I forgot to ask you that.
Matthew 6:33, seek God with all of your strength and seek him and his righteousness first, and all these other things will be added unto you.
Awesome. Well, friends, thank you so much for listening and to be here. My takeaway is something Eva already said, which is you don't have to look too hard or too far for love. It's right in front of you. You just have to reach out and touch it. So with that, thank you again for listening. Until next time.